What's happening, everyone? Just killing some time, going live again, learning about YouTube. And I figured out these live things don't disappear after you do it one time. So I had a few minutes and I figured I'd go on here again and talk a little bit about relative weight and how to measure fish health. It's uh, it's a little bit complex because you kind of have to understand some things that most people don't understand. Just kind of from around, from around groupthink or common knowledge or anything like that. Um, Fish, like let's just specify bass. If we're gonna stock a pond in your yard. That pond in your yard is not managed the way a major public reservoir is managed. It's different. It's smaller. It has limited space, and because it had limited space, we have to be aware of how the fish interact with one another. You can't stock whatever fish you want and get the best results. So there was a teacher and a lot of teachers, but there's been the number one guy who started back in the 30s, Homer Swingle. He did studies. He just stocked all the fish together and kind of figured out that the best combinations of fish to use in ponds. And we can use that information. Frank, what's up, man? I was just going live, checking out, making sure this microphone's working and making another video. If you have a question or anything, drop it in there. Good to see you. I was discussing relative weight and doing a bad job, kind of getting around the point. Um, so Dr. Swingle kind of figured out the best species of fish to stock in ponds, and I learned from Ronnie Gilbert at Georgia, who was a graduate student of Professor Swingle's. So Dr. Gilbert's kind of take on fisheries management was straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Bit quiet. I can try turning it up. I can try getting closer to the thing. I thought it was a bit quiet too the other day. Thanks for that feedback, Frank. Let's try turning up the volume. See if that does anything. Nope, more. Go. I haven't quite figured out everything here. Audio is kind of new to me. All right, now that's got it. Let's see how that works. All right, 320. I changed the audio. So back to the point that I was trying to make. If I stock your pond and you want to give me a report card, track the fish growth and to know how good a job I'm doing with managing your fishery. That nobody knows how to do that. So I'm kind of trying to teach people how you would do that, like to me. And I use these charts, these relative weight charts. And let's just use a real world example. If we come back here to 12, one of the followers came in, he stocked a pond last fall, around September. And he sent me information about his fish. He had a 12 and a half inch fish. So we split the difference between these two, which is on a 12 and a half, we would say that's about a 1 pounder. That means the standard weight for a 1 pound bass is 12 inches. It's kind of my frame of reference. If it's less than that, I have a problem. If it's more than that, I'm doing good. And that's kind of how I use that in pond management. So to use, I think his name's Scott. Scott's fish was 1.4 pounds. It was 12 and a half inches and 1.4 pounds. So we can put that into a mathematical ratio. You divide the 1.4, what we measured, by the 1, which was on the chart, and it gives you 100. It gives you 1.4, or if you multiply that by 100, 140%. So when I say 140% relative weight, that's what I'm referring to is the reference, the difference between the 1.4 and the 1, just in a mathematically expressed way. If you track the relative weight of all the fish that you catch after I stocked your pond, which is exactly what we're doing at Sugar Hill Outdoors, we'll see a pattern in those weights. Now, not every single fish, like in the example fish here, at 140%, that's super high, and you only see that on new ponds. Well, you might see that in an older pond, but it would be really kind of probably out of balance towards not having very many bass and having too many predators. I'm sorry, too much forage. Too much forage is a result of not having enough bass to control it. And when ponds get into that situation, it's usually because of competing species. Something's interfered and disrupted the bass reproduction in some way, that the bass population is small. And the problem with that is when the bass gets suppressed by another fish like that, they have a hard time recovering. Since their fry are born in big numbers. If most of them are being wiped out, you can get to a situation where like crappie or green sunfish can kind of wipe out all the bass that are born every year, even though they're born in such big numbers. It doesn't seem like that could be possible, but it is. And the way that it's possible is that the fry, like of the crappie or the green sunfish, are born before the bass. So they have an advantage. You're talking about tiny little fish around the edges right after they're born, but they're a little bit larger. So when the bass are born, the bass are in trouble at like almost a microscopic level. So anyway, back to relative weight. We'll have another relative weight chart. Here's crappie. So since we're speaking on competing species, we have another chart here. And what you'll notice on the standard weights of crappie, it works the same way as the standard weights of largemouth bass. And I've noticed a trend, and the trend is when I did electrofishing surveys for, let's see, you could do a couple electrofishing surveys for a lot of different types of people. This might be a private landowner, right? They just own a pond and they want to survey their fish. But it also could be an electrofishing survey for like a big corporation that needs to sample fish from the fishery for some reason. Or I don't know, a lot of different reasons why you might have to sample. Like I used to have to sample sometimes public water, sometimes private water. Especially way back then, not very many people had electrofishing boats. So sometimes you got subcontracted out to do weird jobs, like in different places that you wouldn't expect. And not just on private water. But I noticed that when I would go to the rivers or go to the bigger lakes and catch those crappie would be at or above these weights on the chart usually. But the crappie that I was seeing in my private lakes, the smaller places, because not many people own like a 10,000 acre lake, privately. That's going to be public water. The crappie that I caught out of private, smaller bodies of water, say less than 100 acres, were always in poor condition, very, very low in weight compared to the standard weight of what they should be. But like I said, you could go right down the street, just a mile down the street, and catch them out of the river, and they'd be fat and healthy. So it just kind of proves that what works good in a river or in a bigger lake doesn't necessarily work in a pond, and you have to be really in tune with the environment. And like crappie is particularly hard to when they get into your pond to manage the pond for really good bass growth. They really inhibit the bass growth. They just eat up everything. They're good predators. I guess the best way to explain that. Hey, 3 people on here. Thanks for joining, everyone. If you have any, let me make sure I didn't miss any questions. So these things will disappear. Will, what's up, man? Good to see you. I'm just running my mouth on this thing, trying to get a feel for it. But it saves it, so it's cool. I can just sit here when I get a chance and go live and run my numbers up on YouTube a bit. I need to. I was about to make a good point about crappie, and now I can't remember it. Oh, electrofishing, doing electrofishing surveys. So you go do electrofishing surveys a lot, and I had them when I was fisheries, doing fisheries work all the time. I did them a lot, did them every year on every lake that I managed. So I got to see the same lakes many times. Some of them 15 times, some of them not that many, but yeah, Will, thanks for joining, man. So we would go out and I would do do electrofishing survey at Sugar Hill Outdoors pond. I just stocked, and know what's going on. It's looking good. Put the shock boat in and kind of just observe that survey. And I don't even really mean observe it from the point of like taking all the data and measurement. I'm just talking about the fish in the water, just observing the fish that come up and float around the boat due to being stunned, and the fish that move around. All right, you get a feel for like, okay, there's a certain amount of fish kind of flowing by, right? Stunned by this system. Well, you move to another lake with a different fish population, and you'll see the difference in the amount of fish flowing past that same system, right? Same amount of electricity, stunning the same way, in the same area, all the same things, but the only difference is the difference in the fish population itself, right? And that's what I'm trying to explain to people. Like, when you see a pond that has no crappie, and what the base of the food chain, what the bluegill, what the shad, what all that looks like without them versus with them, it's drastic. You can just notice it. It's almost like you wonder sometimes if the electrofishing equipment's even turned on, because there's so few small fish that you can see that you normally do see. I hope that makes sense. But it's pretty obvious. Like I said, when you get on a shock boat and you start shocking up these fish, and you start, really getting in depth to studying what's going on, what's going wrong with the ponds, and what's going wrong with the small lakes. And what's going wrong is there's not enough harvest. It's not a stocking issue anymore. It's kind of a harvest issue. Catch and release is pumped it into everybody's head that you should never keep any fish. And that's not true. A fish population balance is kind of like riding on a bicycle. It can lean, you can lean it one way, you can lean it another way. You certainly can harvest too many fish and lean it that way. But there's the flip side of that coin, where you can not harvest anything and it kind of gets out of balance in another way. Sorry, excuse me. So that's kind of what motivates me to come on here and post this stuff, because I've done a lot of electrofishing over the years, and I don't need the boat anymore. You can just call me and kind of tell me what you've been doing, how you've been managing it, what's been going on. And I have a really good idea of what's going on without even showing up anymore. Because all the lakes have been managed the same way. It's hard to explain, I guess. It's when everyone catch and release every single fish, that's everyone managing a pond very similarly, like the same way. So that's what I mean by that. I've noticed over the years people make an assumption that the people that keep the fish are keeping too many fish. And that's usually the opposite as well. It's usually like when you do the creel surveys and you talk to people and you see how many fish they've caught, they haven't even come close to making a dent in what's available, before they could, start impacting the fish population negatively. And just some rough numbers, like in an unfertilized, unfed pond in Georgia, you can take 10 1-pound bass per acre per year from that water and really not change. You got to go a little bit past 10 pounds per acre before you start changing anything, I guess. For example, if I went to your pond and you let it stun out and all the bass are a pound, you're probably going to have to take 20 pounds of bass or 21-pound bass per acre for a couple of seasons to thin those fish down enough. So, if you're talking about a 10-acre pond, you're talking 21-pound bass per acre, you've got 200 bass that you have to harvest from that pond before you've even done anything to change the fish population. If, say, like I said, if you went out there and did half that, you kept, 100 1-pounders instead of 200, they would replace themselves the next spring. It wouldn't change the fact that the bass are stunted out, and you would effectively have done nothing. You might see a little improved growth in some bass temporarily, but it'll swing right back to stunted out if you just went and harvested it in one time. Like everything in fisheries, the important part is being consistent. You have to be consistent every day with your feeding. You have to be consistent with whatever it is in a pond. It has to be done consistently. Generally, people think that ponds are like an autopilot thing where you just stock it and let it go and it's fine, and it's far away from that. It needs to be managed, Anyway, I don't like the fact that the chat thing, I don't see any new questions. Hey, 4 folks though, man. I didn't even announce or do anything. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I'm just figuring this out. I think this is a good way to communicate with folks. And Frank's got one coming in here. What length is most productive for harvesting given the bass eat smaller bass? So that's a good question, Frank. What you're going to run into is your stunted bass population are going to be stunted usually between like 11 and 14 inches. You'll see them, you'll have 11-inch fish that are under a pound, and you'll have 14-inch fish that are under a pound. There's Wilson. What's up, Wilson? So we let I don't really like to put a number on it like that, Frank, but you can, like I said, because I've done it so many freaking times that it's like a cookie cutter. Every pond is kind of the same, I guess. It's stunted and studded with predators, studded with predators, studded with predators, over and over and over again. And like I said, they usually stun around a pound, so that's that's very safe. It's very safe for me to say that because I've seen it so many times. But if I'm thinking like from book knowledge kind of ways, you don't want to say that. You want to say, hey, go to the lake, catch the fish, measure them, and see where your problems lie. See where, your 11s, are they weighing, are your 12-inch fish, are they weighing right? Your 13s, 14s, 15s, so on and so forth. Or is each size class of fish weighing right? And what you'll find out is most of these places have a whole bunch of 11 to 14s, hardly any, 15s to 20s, and then a few like 24-inch fish that get big enough to eat those 11 to 14s. That's most places that I've ever been. And then mix that with a stunted crappie population that nobody's ever harvested. One of those two things is 90% of the problems that I ran into. And it's interesting. Wilson's here. I saw Mickey Wilson there in the comments, and he's a perfect person to have on because should get him to share time. I noticed there's a way we can share time on here and like split this screen. He's got that 10-acre pond in South Georgia that I've been messing with for, good Lord. I'm going to date us, Wilson. What year was that? 91? Jeez. Yeah, something like that. 91, 92 was the first time I set foot on the Wilson farm. And they had a pond there. And it had problems, issues with crappie. And at the time, that was fishery school. We went fishing there and we just didn't do very good, and everybody talked about how it used to be a good pond, but it's not a good pond anymore. So we'd go fish in other ponds. Well, fast forward a couple of years and I'm in Georgia, and I learned about how crappie, disrupt balance. And I thought, wow, that sure sounds a lot like Mickey Wilson's pond in South Georgia. So I called him up and I said, hey man, I know how to fix that pond, but nobody likes to hear this, but it's a situation where you got to drain it and get rid of all the crappie that are in there, start it from scratch, and, get rid of them. Shoulder's bothering me today. And like that that advice not many people take that advice. And, Mickey and his dad, Tex, his brother Jimmy certainly did not jump onto that, immediately. But the things that they tried didn't work, whatever they were messing with, and they were frustrated with it. And they were like, you know what, why not? Let's just try it. And they did. And Lord, that's been 20 years ago now. And that pond changed, as it always does when you do that. You reset it and you get a really good fishery back. And then that went for about 10 years, and then the crappie start to encroach and the suckers from the stream and so on and so forth. And now that pond has kind of fallen back into where, a fish competition problem, kind of where it started way back in the 90s. It's back there again. So we're going to do some videos out there, talk about it. I'll have Wilson on here and we'll talk about his pond in depth. It's a real good example of a lot of places that I've been associated with, and how like having an introduction, like a stream to introduce unwanted fish in there, is such a problem. And in Georgia, it's really hard because that's what those ponds are there for. They're for irrigation control, and that's what they're built to stop the flow of water in those streams, to slow the rainwater runoff. And the fishing's kind of secondary. Not that we can't have good fishing in those types of streams, but I guess the point being is, when all the streams, these old streams, are connected to our ponds, we have a source of problems associated with what we'll call trash fish. And it's nothing really against the fish themselves. It's just the fact that they don't mix well and they interfere and they cost us money and cost us fish growth. That's why we call them trash fish. You'll catch me calling crappie a trash fish and people will have a panic attack. It's a sport fish. Yeah, but it ruins my life. So there you go. Green sunfish do the same thing. I'm looking at my notes, and I beat up on the crappie, but it's because they cause most of the problems in my life. But green sunfish, I tell you a sneaky way to get green sunfish into your pond. Having a hard time talking. So you've heard of hybrid bluegill, I'm sure. If you've followed anything on the media, this is a dirty trick, and I don't use them. I've never stocked a hybrid bluegill in my life, and I never will. The problem with the hybrid bluegill is a cross between a green sunfish and a bluegill. But the problem with them is they are not sterile like true hybrids. So they can spawn. I can't remember if most of them are male or most of them are female. I can't remember. But it doesn't matter. They can spawn, but since most of them are one of the other sex, they don't spawn well. So a regular bluegill population just, crushes them as far as forage production for largemouth bass. You don't want hybrid bluegill for forage production. That's not what they're designed to do. But the second problem there is when they do spawn, because like I said, they are capable of it. Green sunfish gene is dominant. So when two hybrid fish spawn, the offspring is green sunfish. And that's a real sneaky way that you stock a hybrid bluegill in your pond and then end up with green sunfish. I'm getting alerts on everything. I have to learn how to turn that crap off. So be forewarned on the sneaky green sunfish introduction through hybrid bluegill. I've seen that more times than I care to see. Frank's got a related question. What percentage of bigger, and I'm sorry, Frank, let me restart this. It fades away. What percentage of the bigger bass length can they consume if the prey is a smaller bass? I'm not sure if I'm reading that right. I think you're asking me there. I think Frank's asking how big a bass can swallow, and it's pretty big. It works off the gape of their mouth, like when you grab a bass by the lip, and it looks like a circle like that, right? The size of their mouth will dictate how big a meal a bass can eat, right? So a 1 pound bass is going to have a mouth about like that one, and an 8 pound bass is going to have a mouth like that one. But it doesn't matter about it. Well, the only thing that matters is will it fit in head first. A bass will choke it and get it. If they can't get it head first, which they normally will, they'll get it head first. So if my hand is a fish, and this is the head of the fish, and the bass eats it, we're only worried about the distance from the top of the fish to the bottom of the fish, not the length of the fish this way to eat it, because they're going to eat it head first. And when you consider it that way, bass can consume very, very large meals. So to give you an example, a 16-inch bass can eat a 12. Think about that. A 16, let's pull our thing. Our standard weight chart tells us a 16-inch bass, a standard weight is 2.2 pounds, can eat a 12, which weighs 0.9. So it can eat a fish half its size. Does that answer your question? They can actually eat fish bigger than that because I watch them do it in the tank. If you got these little bass that are like 5 inches, right? They'll eat each other. Like if one's just a little bit smaller in the tank, when you're picking them up, at the fish hatchery, you can just sit there and watch them eat each other in the tank with each other, all the fish born at the same time. So yeah, they're not half the size. They're way bigger than that. The ones that are eating each other in the tank, they're almost the exact same size and they're still eating each other. So that's actually a good question, man. I'm not really sure about that. But the one thing I am sure of is people grossly underestimate the size of fish a bass can eat. They're like, your lures are too big. I'm like, no, they're not. They absolutely are not. I'm getting some consulting. That's cool, man. Well, I'm going to double check for any more questions. If you guys have anything else for me, throw it up there. Perryman comes through. Yeah, green. Will Perryman's question is: the green sunfish have a larger mouth and they can eat more and larger fry? Absolutely, that is true. And if you notice, Mr. Perryman, the mouth on a green sunfish and the mouth on a crab is not much different, and their impact on the system's not much different either. They're negative, bad. Don't like seeing them. I generally see more bass populations wiped out by green sunfish than by crappie. And you generally the smaller the pond, Like if like a pond under an acre has green sunfish, that's the mark of death, man. That thing's doomed. And the bigger they get from there, you know how it goes. Like the larger it gets, the more complex it gets, the more it can kind of buffer those types of issues out. But anything in your backyard management wise, you don't want any of these stupid fish in. Keep it very simple: bass, bluegill, red ear, grass carp. Just like Sugar Hill. Well, I don't see any more questions, gentlemen, and I appreciate all four of you hanging out with me today. I'm going to be doing this a lot more, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.